Most watch collectors think the solution is another watch, another complication, another brand, or another grail. And for a while, that works. The hobby stays exciting, you learn new things, you experience all these different brands, different movements and stories, and different approaches to watchmaking. But over the last year or so, I've been asking myself a question that I honestly didn't expect to ask. Can a watch collection become too large? Not from a financial perspective, not from a storage perspective even, but just from the perspective of actually enjoying this hobby. Because as collectors, we're constantly told that more options are better, right? More variety, more complications, brands, more watches. But what if that's not actually true? What if the thing that's preventing you from fully appreciating your collection isn't that you have too few watches? What if it's that you have too many? And what's interesting is I didn't come to this realization because my watches weren't getting wrist time. In fact, they were. I had a rotation system that was working really well for me. I was enjoying the collection overall, and I was actively wearing all of my watches. So what is it that exactly changed? Well, the answer wasn't what I expected. So today, I want to share 3 observations that completely changed the way that I think about collecting. We're going to talk about the hidden costs that come with a growing collection, why more watches don't always create more satisfaction, and I'll share a realization that I had about one specific watch in my collection that ultimately made me rethink the direction that I wanted to take as a collector. So by the end of this video, I think you'll look at your own collection a little differently, and you may even start asking whether adding another watch is actually the right answer. Now, I think most of us enter this hobby the same way. We buy our first watch. Maybe it's something more affordable, maybe it's a little bit more on the luxury end, but regardless, it sparks that curiosity. Then we start learning, right? We discover YouTube channels, we discover forums, there's Instagram, there's the rabbit hole of Reddit, brand histories, and all the other things, right? Movement architecture, finishing techniques, etc., etc. And suddenly, there is an entire world that we want to explore. And honestly, that's one of the best parts of this hobby is that the learning really never ends. But eventually, something happens. Instead of simply enjoying watches, we start building collections. Then we start optimizing collections. Then we start evaluating collections. And then we start comparing collections. And before long, we can find ourselves spending more time thinking about our collection than actually enjoying it. The collection itself becomes a bit of a project. It's almost like a puzzle. It's kind of a system to optimize. We start asking questions like, do I need a chronograph? Should I add a GMT? Do I need a dive watch? Do I want something in titanium? Maybe I need something independent in my collection. Maybe I need a micro brand. Do I need German watchmaking or do I need Japanese or both? And before we know it, we're no longer buying watches just because we love them. We're buying watches because we're trying to complete some imaginary checklist. And the problem is that that checklist never really ends. There's always another category, always another complication, always another brand, another watch. Now, don't get me wrong. Having multiple watches is fun. Variety is fun. It's the spice of life, right? Experiencing different watches is one of the reasons that many of us got into collecting in the first place. But every watch you add creates a cost. And it may not be the cost that you're thinking about. The first cost that I want to talk about is attention. So every watch you add receives a smaller percentage of your focus, right? It's just natural. When you only own one watch, every experience belongs to that one watch. So every trip, every career accomplishment, every memory. And when you own 10 watches, those experiences, just by sheer numbers, start to become fragmented a bit. Now, the second cost is appreciation. When something becomes abundant, we naturally begin to value it less. This isn't unique to watches, it's human psychology. When you only have 1 or 2 watches that are really exceptional, you tend to appreciate them far more deeply. And when you have a large collection, it's easy to become accustomed to remarkable things. Things that should feel special, but they begin to feel normal. Now, the third cost is mental bandwidth, because a collection doesn't just occupy physical space in your watch box or wherever, it also occupies your mental space. So you start thinking about what comes next, what should be sold, what should be upgraded, what should be added, and maybe what should be traded in. And if we're not careful, this hobby can slowly shift from enjoyment to management. I think this is where psychology becomes really important. So there's a concept that I've talked about before called hedonic adaptation. And the basic idea of it is really simple. Human beings adapt to positive experiences remarkably quickly. The thing that once was exciting to you 6 months ago starts to become normal. And the thing that amazed you last year becomes just another one of your expectations. Now, the danger for collectors is that we often misdiagnose the problem. We feel less excitement, so we assume we may need another watch. But often the issue isn't that the collection is lacking something. The issue is that we've adapted to what we already have in the collection. We've become accustomed to it. And that is a dangerous cycle, because if the answer is always another purchase, there will never be a finish line. It's not there. No watch is enough. No collection is ever enough. Not even any grail that you can go after is enough. There's always another level. There's always another upgrade, another chase. And eventually you have to ask yourself, am I collecting watches or am I just collecting novelty? Because those are two very different things. So this is where things became interesting for me personally. What's funny is that I wasn't neglecting my watches at all. I actually had a pretty structured rotation around the collection. And at one point, I almost had kind of a watch for each day of the week mentality. So Monday was a certain watch, Tuesday was another watch, Wednesday was another. And I honestly really enjoyed that. The watches were getting worn, the collection was being used, which is the whole goal, right? I've talked about it on this channel. So this wasn't a situation where half my collection was sitting off in a safe somewhere. I was genuinely engaging with the watches that I owned. And I was also okay with some overlap, right? We've talked about this too. I had several blue dial watches, some use cases that overlapped, and even versatility that was similar between different pieces. But I had intentionally built the collection around a theme, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. The observation that really caught my attention wasn't about neglect at all. It was about appreciation. I found myself looking at my Jaeger-LeCoultre and thinking, man, this watch is extraordinary. Like the engineering, the finishing, the perpetual calendar, the enamel dial, and the history of the brand. Everything about it felt special to me. And yet, I was only wearing it about 1 day per week because it was simply one watch among many. And that started to feel strange to me. Again, not because I didn't love the other watches, but because I realized that there were certain watches I wanted to spend more time with. Certain watches that I kind of joke and said they deserve more attention from me. And I also noticed something else. Part of me wanted to continue expanding the collection at the same time. I was enjoying that blue dial theme that I had going in the collection. I enjoyed discovering new brands, and I liked finding new watches that I had never run into before, even as someone who's been in this space for several years now. But if I'm being completely honest, there was another factor involved, and y'all know me here as a content creator. And so as a creator, more watches also meant more content, more reviews, more comparisons, more ability to discuss, more opportunities to create videos. And there is nothing inherently wrong with that approach. There are some people that do it extremely well and enjoy what they're doing. But it forced me to ask an important question. Was every edition improving my experience as a collector, or was I partially starting to optimize a little bit for content creation? And that was a surprisingly difficult question to answer. And the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that some of the watches that I valued most were the ones that I wanted to spend more time with, not less, which is ultimately why I've started wearing my Jaeger-LeCoultre much more frequently during the week. It fits my professional environment perfectly. It's one of the most meaningful watches that I've ever owned. And instead of reserving it for a single day each week, usually Monday, I wanted it to become part of my everyday experience again. And that was a shift in thinking that started to change a lot for me. So what actually makes a great watch collection? I don't think that it's size. I don't think that it's value. I don't think it's prestige. And I don't think it's even completeness. I think a great collection is one where every watch matters. Every watch has a reason to be in that collection. Every watch creates some level of enjoyment for you. Every watch contributes something meaningful to your experience. Now, that contribution could be a lot of different things, right? It could be emotional. It could be more on the technical side. There could be some historical aspect that you appreciate about it. And it could simply that you just love looking at it. We've talked about that as well. But there should be a reason, because if the goal is satisfaction, then the collection should support satisfaction. Not endless acquisition, not endless optimization, and not continual upgrading either. Just sheer enjoyment of your watches. One of the biggest realizations that I've had recently is that the answer isn't always another watch. No, sometimes it is. There are incredible watches that are out there, and there are brands that I still admire. Grunefeld, Sartori Biard, there's so many of them that I've talked about. There are still watches that I want to experience, try on, have on the wrist, play with the complication, but sometimes the answer is not addition. Sometimes the answer is just to appreciate those watches. And sometimes it's spending more time with the watches that you already own. Sometimes it's building that stronger connection with the pieces that matter most to you. And sometimes it's realizing that a collection can become better by actually getting smaller. I don't think there's a perfect collection size out there. For some people, it may only be one watch. For others, it may be 20 or 50. But I do think it's worth asking yourself a simple question. If you could only spend time with the watches that genuinely matter to you, how many watches would there still be in your collection? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about this. How many watches are in your collection today? And what do you think the ideal collection size actually is? Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please do like the video and subscribe to my channel, and take a look at the last video that I posted about how you can evaluate a watch in 8 simple steps. So thank you so much for stopping by, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye-bye.